It's also just like, you know what? That is the first thing that I've heard someone say about AI that I wasn't like, shut up. I'm like, just nerd.
I've heard that you've got a YouTube channel. What's it called again?
Mystere.
It's called
spell it correctly for them. So
Mystere.
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 Yeah. Well, with a capital E at the end, right?
Yeah, to emphasize that E. So there's Mystery Movement is the handle if you're looking for it.
Nature of life.
A little birdie told me that you're a revolutionary. What does that mean?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. Look, a revolutionary is someone who is just looking to make change, societal change, that is. Now, a lot of people think, the word revolution, I would say it's been tarnished by propaganda, but you think of revolution as like the armed struggle and the takeover and the resulting change in government or a coup or something like that. But revolution is not that. Revolution is just a process of change. And like we were talking about before, constituting that change. The real revolutionary acts, if you think about the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution or something like that, was not the armed takeover. But when they sat down the next day and were like, oh shit, we did this. What the fuck do we do now?
Yeah, the day after.
Yeah, that's right. Revolution. So like revolution is not, it's not an armed struggle. It's not a physical thing. It's actually about planning a better world for whatever that means for the people that have it in their mind.
So we'll talk about what that better world looks like. Sorry, I'm going to take over a little bit. But what are the sort of things that you want to change?
Right. Okay, that's good. Look, if we're going to lead down a Marxist trajectory at some point, like revolution in that sense is about changing the world for working people. So from that stems every other type of improvement that you could have to society. So if you improve society for the majority of people, as opposed to the minority of people that might control things, like people call them the establishment or elites or something like that, those people kind of produce everything in their own interests and like everything kind of works around them. But if you started working society for the majority of people out there, then that would be a revolutionary act. And that is kind of my take on revolution. So I'm just trying to make a change for the majority of people out there.
How do we make it work for the majority without screwing up the system where it eats itself? Because look, when throughout my uni years, I was part of the communist movement. I've dabbled into that entire realm myself. But one of the
it's a good word.
It's a dabble, yeah. Hey, you know when I was wearing a mask.
Yeah, I remember it well. Obama's a war criminal, man.
But when but a lot of the pushback that I got was that the examples of revolutionary change, like you mentioned the Russian one, or you could argue, the Chinese one, have not led to societies that we might necessarily envy.
Yes, but they are still revolutionary nonetheless because they've enacted some form of change. Now, whether that change is good, an improvement, that's like the $1 million question. But like they gave it a shot. They gave it a good crack.
So, okay, so I know this isn't a gotcha question. This is a genuine question, and you can answer. You're wearing a mask, so you can answer this like honestly. Was the experiment worth it? Was the 20th century revolutionary experiment worth it?
Yes, absolutely. It was unfortunate how it unfolded, and it was unfortunate how it ended. But like that was the culmination of like the class consciousness of the majority of people. They attempted to try and change society in some way, shape, or form because they understood that they were ultimately being fucked over by it. Like in every which direction and every way they turned. So they gave it a shot, and they believed in people that they thought would provide them with that opportunity for a better life. Now, like what you're saying is that a lot of those things ended up in, I guess, horrendous situations where you have like particularly the deaths of millions of people or people starving, like in the Chinese Cultural Revolution, depending on the whims of like one tyrannical leader. But like they did have some solid ideals to start with. And like they did, I think, in their inception, start from a place of like good intent. They did actually try to change the capitalist system and try and bring on something that was an evolution of that. So they weren't trying to revert back to something from the past, which is another form of revolution, which is actually the definition of revolution. If you think about the actual word, it's revolution is coming back around again. And that's what revolution actually meant back in the day, like for feudal societies. It was like disposing one king to bring back the one that you actually liked. And so you come full circle. But revolution now today has more of a kind of like a narrow trajectory. It's just like going forward or changing from this to that and never going back again. So revolution now, like I said before, it's tainted. It's got this perception of bloodshed and like adversity and hardship. And like, you know, if you want to create a revolutionary society, you're going to have to take on a lot of sacrifices because it's for the greater good and all that sort of stuff. But that's just one form of revolution.
And is let's say we go into a revolutionary society and we do bring about some massive change, right? Some kind of like October Revolution kind of an change.
Yeah.
Not necessarily what it entailed, but do we stay in that revolutionary frame of mind, or is there like a destination where we could be like, okay, now we've reached utopia, no more revolutionary?
Question. So I think it is inherently an idea that comes from living in a capitalist society, or the society that we have now, to think that like this is just the highest point of human social evolution. This is the highest form of civilization we're ever going to get, living in a market society. And so no, revolution keeps on going forever because humans are always changing.
Hang on. Let's just back out of it. What is not a market society?
What is not a market society?
What else
society,
is there?
A slave society. So where like...
But there's no such thing as like a slave society, is there? Like that was a market.
Well, look, that was the way that the goods were produced in society on the back of slaves.
A sector of the economy, yeah.
Yes, but the sector of the economy that produces all the things that you have around you, the economic mode of that society is the main driving force of that society. That's a Marxist ideal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like a feudalist society is also one that isn't. But the thing is, they are though, aren't they? Because there's still commodities getting traded.
Yeah, there's still commerce, there's still trade, there's all that sort of stuff that's happening. But the means of production, if you want to use that term, which is bastardized now, but it's true to what it means. The way that most of the stuff is produced in that society, that drives everyone. So you have a class of people, the working class, that produces all the shit that everyone needs to survive, and everyone else lives off top of that, whether that's an upper class or an educated class, an administrative
Don't
class.
forget the fat catch in Canberra.
Political class, like whoever it is, there's one sector of society that produces all the shit that everyone needs, and everyone else feeds off that, like your worker bees and all the other types of bees or whatever in the hive that are living off that system. The economic mode, so that would be a slave society, you know, in ancient times, they produced all the shit that everyone lived off, basically. Majoritively. There was other people producing stuff as well, don't get me wrong. In a feudal society, you have the serfs or the peasantry that produce all the shit that everyone lives off. It feeds their armies, feeds the clergy, feeds the aristocracy, whatever you want to call it.
How do we reconcile, this is something that I have had difficulty reconciling, like Marxism, particularly in today's time, because what you're saying, although people did argue against it, but you could say that during Marx's time, or even in the 20th century, that was fair. But how do we look at like this AI productivity, where a lot of like, let's say that Tesla Gigafactory, right, where it was mostly done by robots.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the labor is essentially machinery in this case.
Yes.
So who gets the economic benefits from it?
From like the production of like machines making other.
Yeah. So let's say
goods and
Tesla
stuff like that.
factory is completely automated, right?
Yep.
Assuming it's not at the moment, but let's say it is. There's someone that owns Tesla, right?
Yep.
There's a group of people that own
Yep.
Tesla, and then there's machines that are making Tesla, and then we are essentially consumers of
Yes.
Tesla.
Yes.
So if the Gigafactory is producing 50,000 Tesla cars a year,
Yeah.
by machines, who gets to appropriate that economic advantage?
Okay, so like in a situation like that, it really just comes down to then not who are the productive class of society, but then who owns the means of production, which is the other flip side, I guess, of Marxism and revolutionary thought, is who controls all of the means of producing everything. So if that's owned by one person or a private entity that's just producing all of these cars, let's say, they are the class that controls that sector of the economy. If you're talking about value, who's actually creating value there, that's a whole different rabbit hole. It'll take
actually, that's a rabbit hole that I don't know if everyone wants to go into.
Yeah.
But the idea that the use value, like the labor provides all value.
Yes.
In that case, who's providing value?
In that case, who's providing value will be the people that make
It's the robots, right?
No, it's the people that make the machines that make the machines.
Yeah, but when the machines start making the machines, that's the world he's talking about, right? At that point.
But like someone made the machine to make the machines. Someone made the artificial intelligence. Their labor was quintessential in that process. And without their labor, then you wouldn't have a machine to make machines with.
So you think that the tech nerd should have all of that money?
The tech nerd or group of tech nerds that put that stuff together have more of a right to it than Tesla.
Yeah, but like sometimes Tesla is made by nerd geeks.
But at some point, that machine that guy made, that machine will start making machines.
Yeah.
And so what? He just keeps getting the royalties from that machine that made the other machines? Because that machine now has consciousness and it's just like, I can do it better.
Yeah, if you think of like...
Or do you give the money to that robot?
Well, look, this is like huge thought experiment stuff.
RoboCop goes to strip clubs.
But like this is huge thought experiment.
Damn, they're running out of ideas.
But like essentially, if you had a consciousness, like we have people that have consciousness and like contribute their time and effort to make stuff, and you allow a robot to do all that conscious activity, and they start producing shit on their own and allowing us to survive, then technically all of us then become that dominant class. We're all the capitalists that control these group of robots who are in servitude and serve us and provide all of our basic needs. But like,
so would you be fighting for the robots' rights then?
But from the first person that picked up a stone and used it as a hammer or a tool, like, would you fight for the rights of the stone? Probably not. I wouldn't be fighting for the rights of the machine because we've produced them to make our lives easier. So if we get to that level and there are machines that just take over and do all of our stuff for us and we just get to live human existences, the whole idea of someone making money off those machines would become superfluous, would be completely absurd. Because what the hell would you need money for? There is an entity out there, a conscious entity, a machine building all and making all the shit we need to survive. People wouldn't need money anymore. People wouldn't need to live in a market system, because everything would just be done for them by machines.
All right, let's rewind, because Jordan's been discussing Marxism for the last two pods. So
yeah, no. As soon as four guys are on a podcast, it just turns into, what do you think about AI?
yeah. So we'll move away from AI because a lot of it is conjecture.
But it's also just like, you know what? That is the first thing that I've heard someone say about AI that I wasn't like, shut up! Like, just nerds.
But so let's go into some of the history. Of
well, I've got actually a good question about this. First off, like, you would have to admit that this, look, I know that I make a huge point on Friendlyjordies about never using these words, but you kind of just have to when you're talking about this, right?
Yeah.
But that so-called capitalist revolution, let's just say, where, means of production were kind of just made by someone who organized a bunch of people in a factory to say, like, all of you focus your efforts on making, let's use this example, the car, because say someone like Henry Ford, for instance.
Yeah.
Before that, the people's labor, because they would have just been working as shoe shine boys or whatever, would have been like, let's say 50 cents a day.
Yeah.
And then Henry Ford is like, come work at my factory.
Yep.
You don't need to learn any more skills. You just need to go on this machine all day. All of a sudden, your labor's worth $5. Times 10 increase in their economic outlook on life.
Yep.
That's huge.
Yeah. But like Henry Ford was also iconic because of what he did for the idea of mass production. Before that, the car was inaccessible to most people. It was a luxury item.
Yeah.
And he made that accessible because of the way that he mass-produced a car, and one make of a car, the Model T or whatever it was called.
The Ford Fiesta.
But like, I'm unsure of what your question is.
Well, I'm just saying, like, I don't know. It's just the more I went into this, the more I started realizing look, man, like it's like with everything. It's like, yeah, there's positives and negatives, and one of the big positives was it greatly increased the quality of life for most people. Now, there was obviously environmental impacts and all this kind of stuff, but organizing society like that has given us the future wonder world that we live in now, where we're just so unbelievably productive that you look at the inventions that are happening every year now, and it's just kind of like I don't know, year 0 to now, and then it's like Henry Ford invents the factory, and it goes
Look, if I can just bust a few myths then about what like Marx's thought was and his form of revolutionary thinking, like he was all for capitalism, okay? Like he was probably one of the first to admit, not the first, but okay, he was openly admitting that capitalism has provided the world with unprecedented productive power, which is to go back to what we were talking about before. There is no machine like the capitalist mode of production. Slave society got nothing, feudal society got nothing on that stuff. Like capitalism is absolutely revolutionary in itself, and it has pulled the world out of feudal style arrangements and property relations, meaning people get more shit. Okay, and Ford was beautiful in that he mass produced what the previous industrial capitalists were giving to the world. He just made it mass production. So like all of us plebs could have access to this shit. So capitalism is amazing. It can do that. It can innovate. It can change technology, like what you're saying, unbelievably, almost exponentially, right? But that is just step one of the process. Once you start on a trajectory where you start giving people more or a higher living standard, and you start tearing them off the land and bringing them into cities, and like they start living closer together and having to work together to produce shit, as opposed to just living like separately all over the world, they're starting to become more conscious. They're going to ask for more shit, but they're not just going to ask for more shit. They're going to ask for a bigger slice in the pie, and they're going to want more autonomy. They're not going to put up with a small group of people that control everything anymore. They're going to want a new society that meets their new expectations. And that's where capitalism falls over.
But here's the question. Is it possible to organise society like that without a small group of, kind of like generals organising an army?
Well, we talked about that before. People have tried, and they have always come up short, it would seem. Lenin gave it a good crack, and look what happened eventually in Russia.
But this is the whole thing about Russia, for instance. Like now that I'm arguing the other point, but both Russia and China, their living standards increased exponentially as well. They had much higher living standards in Russia and China.
Yeah. But like Lenin had to do something fucking incredible, and so did like Mao. They had to not only revolutionize their society to try and bring it to a socialist or a communist one, they actually had to turn it into a capitalist society to start
first.
With.
Yes,
they all knew that. You don't go from fucking feudalism to to socialism. You got to put that extra step in, and it's capitalism. This is what we're going back to talking about before. Marx knew that capitalist production was the way to go. It's the start of all things that are beautiful to come. But first, you got to deal with capitalism, and then you got to keep going towards the next step, which is socialism. Right. But that's not inevitable. And Marx taught that and knew that greatly. He's spoken about it a lot in his work. It's not an inevitable step, socialism.
I thought Marx did say that it was inevitable, that eventually there will be a workers' revolution because of the exploitation.
As long as the working class are conscious. And I think over the last 50 years, class consciousness has dropped out of like the lexicon. Like nobody uses the word working class anymore. It's a dirty word. And that is on purpose.
Yes, but why do you think that happened?
Why do I think it dropped out? Well, look, it depends how much you want to go into modern history, I guess. But like post-World War II, you've got to think of the world as like kind of split between East and West, basically. And like American hegemony was going to start making its big claim to the whole world, okay? And so it needed to do that by one way, and that was to kind of dispel this growing idea, which was communism. Like most of Europe had communist parties, or if not all of Europe, and communism was on the rise as like an ideology, like massively. And so in the aftermath of World War II, the Americans had to get in there and like they said, look, we'll restore you, Europe, but everyone on this side of the wall here, you get rid of and eradicate these communist ideals. They're not allowed to be part of any of your democratic institutions, and they became outlawed. And it was just a matter of time until, I guess, the wall fell, until they got the rest of people that would have considered themselves communist, apart from China. But then by the 70s, you have China opened up to the world market, and then the rest is history. Like, China's not communist.
But it's not like he owns a monopoly on the idea of the working class being in class consciousness, like Marxists and communists, and like, for instance, that's just classic Labor Party rhetoric. They're always appealing to the working class.
Yes,
like there are all these workers' parties that are still thriving across the planet, form government all the time.
Yeah, and like that's another. Let's bust a few more myths about Marx. Like, Marx was not the inventor of communism or socialism or anything like that. A lot of people do think that he is, but like he was just riding on the wave of very popular enthusiasm in the 1850s and like onwards. When he sat down and wrote the Communist Manifesto with Engels, like they were just riding the wave of popular support for that ideal. People had seen what capitalism had produced for industrial workers, which was fucking pretty hardcore and horrendous working conditions, and they just thought that with all the technological progress that they had, all the increases to living standards and all that sort of stuff, they were just like, well, fucking, why don't we get to make a decision on this shit? We're the ones at the coalface, so let's decide what to do with the fruits of our labor. So it's an ideal first. Marx did say it was inevitable in the sense that of his like dialectical view of history and all that sort of stuff. But like, again, it's very important that the people know, like the people have to be conscious of their own position in the economic system to want to fight for a better future, or one that they have a say in, not just complain about it.
It's a lot of burden. This is the problem with it. It's a lot of burden on society to say everyone should be participating and democratizing and making political decisions, when, you know, you factor in things like people's just will, their natural psychological will. It's got nothing to do with the system. It's just to do with can they be bothered? There's another thing of people's just varying intelligences. There's also just the fact that, like, you know, a lot of people are just happy doing a 9 to 5.
Yes.
There's all that.
Yeah. And like, I think that plays in, like, let's take the last thing you said there, people are happy doing a 9 to 5. I don't think like socialism on a step away from capitalism presupposes that anyone has to do more than a 9 to 5. If anything, they might actually work less, because if they democratize their workplace, they all might decide to have a 3-day working week instead. So like,
but then you're really reducing productivity. Isn't this the problem that France had recently, where they tried to put in a 4-day weekend and then they realized we just can't compete? We're getting left in the dust.
Like, that's not necessarily true. Even if you look at like Soviet economic measures, like they were not less productive. Like they were actually probably producing more than the West was. What they did,
but were they having 4-day work weeks?
Well, in some cases they didn't necessarily have 4-day work week, but the ideal utopia of socialism was that you work 9 to 3 or whatever in your day job, then you go play guitar for whatever. The whole idea was like, Marx was essentially trying to say that it's the whole the dialectics thing, the backwards and forwards thing, that capitalism only looks at forward. So they look at like a person as labor, like the amount of utility that person can provide, but it discounts that it's a human being that has like all of these different intricacies about them. And so Marx was kind of bringing that forward and saying, how can we make a system where we can cater to all of these sort of needs? So the idea was that you go back and you do whatever you want and you do work less. But the one thing that I don't know if like you can sort of tell me more about it in case I'm getting something wrong.
Yeah.
But it did kill innovation.
Right.
Like if you look at Soviet cars, for instance, right? They were producing more cars than Ford was in certain cases.
Yeah.
But Ford had better cars.
Right.
And one of the things that capitalists often say is that the reason why that is because the competition angle of everything. And there's multiple things that are competing against one another. Yeah. They're trying to get more and more market share. That leads to them having this need to innovate because that's the only way you can get market share, as opposed to if you've got state-run enterprises that are producing stuff but are not necessarily innovating because they don't necessarily need to innovate.
Yes. So when it comes to, I guess, the laws of coercive competition, as Marx would call it, in terms of capitalists fighting against each other to create that next level of innovation or whatever, to have the edge on their competitors to be able to get a bigger slice of the market. Capitalism does that to perfection. It does it really, really well. But the other thing that capitalism also does, which no one really talks about for some reason, and someone like Adam Smith was all over this, it monopolizes industry as well. So once they get a little bit bigger, they'll eat their neighbor, and then they don't have to compete with them, and then they don't have to compete with you either, and they don't compete with you until you get to a situation where there's a cartel of maybe a few of the biggest players out there, and you think that they're innovating at lightning pace, but they could have been doing so much better if there was 100 of them as opposed to 10.
Yes.
But because it's a market system, there's about 5 of them, so they must be doing okay then. But a state-owned enterprise, something let's take the Soviet Union. I do want to try and remove the ideas of socialism/communism from the Soviet Union, but
they had a crack.
Look at it as a planned economy. They had a good crack, and if you think about what they did, taking Russia, which was basically a feudal society, when they took it over, and let's say they really started kicking into gear in 1921 till the 60s. We're talking about 40 years. They've gone from feudal society to space age society.
That's nuts. That's crazy. You don't learn that on your Ben Shapiro Daily Wire, do you?
Think about it just objectively. Don't think about the political influences that what's actually happening.
Yeah.
They piggybacked the ideas of capitalism to do that. They industrialized their country. But they went from fucking feudalism to space age society and kicking the Americans' ass at fucking space race, let me just say. So fuck making cars if you can put men in space or dogs in space or monkeys or whatever the fuck they were doing at the start.
Hell yeah.
Right? They were competing where they chose to compete. And if it wasn't producing Model T Ford, it was producing a fucking rocket ship. Let them produce a rocket ship.
That's a good argument,
man.
That's
a really good point, and often underappreciated, the colossal growth of the Soviet Union in that period, particularly the early phases of it.
And how much it went down once the Americans came in with Yeltsin.
Yeah, well, yes.
The society just went...
I mean, you could argue that the system had already reached the threshold where they had to do it because they didn't have many options. Having said that... You mentioned about how you want to make a society that serves the many. The question is, sure that they were a space force and they definitely beat the US in reaching the moon and everything. But was it a better society for the majority? Was the average Soviet citizen how come they were trying to get to the west of the wall and no one was going from the west to the east?
Right. And this is why, I said, I prefaced all of that by saying I really want to separate Soviet society and socialism, communism, because I think they're completely different things. The Soviets had a planned economy, which a lot of people associate with socialism because you got to plan stuff to make it work as opposed to just letting the market decide, kind of thing. So in that sense, they did a lot of good economically, but what you're saying is socially, they went into totalitarian territory, which is from a kind of, let's say, civil rights perspective, is the worst shit that you can do, right? You don't just control people in an authoritarian way. You also control their entire life, how they think, what they see, everything about that. So they had to go down that way in order to survive in a capitalist world. And Marx always talks about this, but socialism, the change from capitalism to the next phase, is an international movement or nothing. The biggest mistake the Russians made, or the Stalinists made, or whoever, was that they became insular. If you do not promote the socialist revolution outside of your borders, and you just shut up shop and just try and make sure that you can survive in a capitalist world, capitalism will eat you every day. It might take 10 years, it might take 50, it doesn't matter.
But that's kind of a bit of a misnomer anyway, isn't it? Well, not misnomer, but they did fund a lot of proxy wars and a bunch of parties throughout the world. So they were doing it. But it's also like, what else can you do when everyone else is like, no, that's a bad idea?
Yeah.
You can't have to shut up shop.
You have to. Like they were facing some prodigious and like unprecedented challenges. The ability for like the Russians to turn around what they did, like after their revolution, and like produce what they did with like Russian society is just fucking unfathomable and revolutionary.
Yeah.
But it's not socialist. So like, you know, it's not really communist at the end of the day because they got eaten by the capitalist machine. So unless you keep pushing beyond your borders, like they intended, like Lenin said, like, you know, we'll do what we can with Russia, but we're really waiting for Germany to have its revolution, for Britain to have its revolution, because once they do, like, there's no stopping the machine at that point. But when all that failed, like Russia dissolved, like they tried to have a revolution, it failed. Like there was revolutionary activity in like England. These are the main industrial societies at the time. When that shit failed, then they had to look in on themselves. And once they shut shop and like they really openly supported other revolutionaries or socialist countries, then
because Marx
was
expected
over.
a revolution in England as opposed to Russia.
Yeah.
Marx thought that like advanced capitalist societies were probably closer to a revolution than like a feudal society.
Because they are the most conscious. They have seen capitalism in all of its, you know, forms, and they know exactly what to expect, so they know how to fight it best.
But
That
what
was
we
the
do
intent.
know, we do notice from history is that often places where there was some kind of a revolutionary change, particularly a socialist revolutionary change, it was just backwaters. It was dirt poor.
Yes.
Whether it be China, whether it be
Yes.
Russia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Cuba. You didn't have revolutions in Germany. You didn't have revolution in England. Like what was expected before. So somehow, I guess feudal societies are more conducive to revolution than capitalist societies are.
They are more easily taken over than a capitalist society, because capitalist society has an inbuilt and burrowed in establishment and elite that are very powerful and very conscious. That's the thing. They know exactly what's going on.
Powerful than like a bunch of feudal lords and...
Well, like the feudal lords are, I guess, they're like, you know, talking about monarchies and kings, like stuff like that. They're puppets in a sense, and they are given their things by birthright. Capitalists work hard for their shit. They know how to get on top, and they know how to fucking stay there. They are clever people. They weren't born into that position.
Yeah,
and
true.
They know how to fucking fight for shit tooth and nail.
Yes.
And that's why
they built a
failed in
factory from
Germany.
nothing.
And that's why, that's why it failed in Germany. That's why any revolutionary activity failed in Britain.
What about the argument though that it's just
Germany came pretty close though.
They got
really close. Indonesia came really close.
that's no big
Indonesia,
deal.
isn't that interesting? Fucking
Yeah.
mental.
Why is that?
Well, exactly. Why there? But like,
I think the
No,
first,
but it's not Britain, is it?
no. But like Germany lost the First World War, Britain didn't. So Germany, that's why Hitler also took over. Like the state was already weak. Exactly the point that you're talking about.
Didn't he call himself a socialist?
he's a
Hitler?
national socialist. Yeah.
Yeah, but like not necessarily in the socialist sense that you're thinking.
Right.
He rode the wave of popular support for socialism. He wasn't an idiot. He knew exactly what the people wanted.
Right.
And he gave him that
In fact,
to a
his-
certain extent.
Right.
His entire platform was, if you elect me, I'm going to get rid of the communists.
Oh,
Well, like that's how the Nazi Party came into power, is because of that communist revolution that almost happened. They were the people on the ground fighting the communists.
oh fuck.
Yeah,
Yes.
they were the
The more
ones
you
fighting
know.
in the streets.
And teach you that. in
OG
the bloody school book.
Antifas.
That's interesting. Fuck. Wow.
Yeah, it's just, what about the idea that it's not just the elite controlling the public, it's also just the public is aware and they're kind of just cool with it.
Yeah, and it's what I'm talking about, class consciousness. Like people are desensitized to capitalism today, or market economies and stuff like that. They expect to be consumers and not players.
Yes.
And so if you've bred and instilled that ideology into generation after generation of people, then what thirst do they have for change, really? Because like,
But that's the whole thing. Like people in those feudal societies did have the thirst for change.
they had the thirst for fucking rebellion. That's for sure. They
Yes.
got pissed off, and like
Yeah.
if this king or whoever it was stepped out of line, they'd fucking kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying is just like
But
they
they weren't-
must be benefiting from it if they're fine to be kind
Even
of
those peasants weren't revolutionary. They didn't kill the king and say we're taking over. They just said, "All right, now you're in charge. Now don't fuck it up," and they gave it to someone else. They didn't try and change the game, man. So like you need people that are understanding of their worth and their value in that society, which is what working class people used to know. That's why we have things like labor parties and stuff like that, because there are two forms of struggle that Marx talks about. There's the economic struggle, which is, getting out there, picketing, joining a union, all that sort of stuff, physically confronting the system by facing your boss and telling him to get fucked. And there's the political struggle. So that is infiltrating the political system with your own people and instilling your policy and reform and trying to get that going. Now, we still have labor parties and workers' parties and social democratic parties, but they have no attachment to revolutionary ambition anymore. It was in like 19...
But did they ever?
Yeah, I was just about to say, in the 1980s, on the 90s, the British Labour Party or the English Labour Party under Tony Blair it was the first time they scratched out one of their objectives in their their doctrine, which was seizing the means of production. They still had that in their party book.
Really?
And they scratched that out in the
Wow.
90s.
Bro, the labor left back in the day were just commies. Like they were straight up communists.
Yeah.
Like half of your Labour Party was more than half. They were the dominant faction. Were communists, which is why they could never ban the Communist Party in Australia. There was a massive case.
Yeah.
Because there was just
No, I think it was also the fact that people thought you open up a Pandora's box when you do that.
yeah,
and they
that
didn't
was
want
the
to go down there.
argument. But a lot of it was people being afraid because a lot of people were communists at the time.
Was there that many that were communists?
Yeah, they were legit communists. Like they weren't communists in the sense like some modern people are. Like, oh, I think Marx is cool. They were legitimately communists. They believed in everything that Mystere just said, and they were. Why do you think they were in the Labour Party? They were infiltrating the institutions.
Yeah, they were infiltrating it, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think it was like the majority of people in the Labor Party. I think people in the Labor Party were mostly of this idea that, no, like it's just you make sure that workers get a better cut. That was kind of their objective. It wasn't this idea of, the overthrow and changing society so that...
Maybe not majority. I don't know the exact numbers, but a lot of them legitimately wanted to overthrow society as well.
Back in the day.
Socialists back in 100 years ago, communists, socialists, whatever you want to call them, like Labour, Democrats, like these people did have revolutionary ideals. They understood what they were doing. They were well-educated people, well-read, well-versed. They weren't dumbed down and fed the stuff that they decided to, consume in terms of like literature and all that sort of stuff. They knew exactly what was going on. They would go along to be parts of associations and get active and talk about politics and stuff like that. If you go back to the American Revolution, that is the ideal of democracy right there. The idea of freedom and the pursuit of happiness has got nothing to do with being able to do whatever the fuck you want to do. The pursuit of happiness is just being able to associate with other people and talk politics. That's what the founding fathers thought was the pursuit of happiness. So these people 100 years ago, they were forming Labour parties like in Australia, which was registered as a socialist party. The Labour Party was originally a socialist party. They knew exactly what the fucking end game was. They might not have been revolutionaries in themselves, but they knew that step one was...
Okay, so it's a soft revolution party as opposed to just
It's step one. It's get politically active and get involved. And then if you do that enough, then quantitative changes lead to a qualitative switch.
Mm-hmm.
Just
and
put the mic a bit closer.
the reason that I've just gotten really interested in it is why I started reading Das Kapital again is because I read a book that kind of changed it. I talked to Ali, he's so bored of this conversation now, but this book that was saying living standards have increased so much in the developed world that there's no appetite for it anymore because at some point, your needs are more than met.
Yep.
And people it's very not uncommon that you're on your $80,000, $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
You've got more than enough money.
Yeah.
And at that point, there's no thirst for it.
Yes. Yeah. People become complacent when they are comfortable. There's no doubt about that. But like, let me turn that idea on its head and say that if people are so well provided for in this current system, because it produces so much shit, then why do we need to have people that control things for monetary or profitable reasons? Why can't we just provide for society?
Well, I guess it's just the same argument that Ali was saying, is that it's hard to organize society in that really democratic way. You kind of do need this, like, no, fuck you, you're twisting that bolt.
Yeah.
To keep the innovation going.
And like at that time it was necessary, especially if you're, pulling feudal Russia out and trying to make it an industrial society, or you're pulling feudal China out and you're trying to make them an industrial society. You need someone to say, yes, turn that bolt, you stay on that production line and you do this kind of thing. But you in today's society, do we need that thing that I was talking about before? Do we need a violent takeover? Do we need a revolutionary moment that's like some armed coup or something like that? Can't we just have that through our existing democratic institutions? Can't we have a referendum that first step is, create the republic? Then, after that, we sit down and we really think about how society should be run and what our fucking priorities are. And if they are human rights, like modern human rights, not like, human rights from at the end of like World War II, but like, making sure that everyone has a house, making sure that everyone has access to electricity, making sure people have clean water, and like even access to the internet. That should be a human right. If you start to change these kind of ideals, because society is so prosperous anyway, we can deliver this to these people. Take these things off the market. Why do these things have to be commodities? Why does housing have to be a commodity? Why does telecommunications infrastructure and electricity have to be a commodity? Give those things to the people and let's let them do their own things, and they'll decide whether they want to be players.
Well, I suppose it's just like the same thing that the Labor Party came across in 2019, which is they tried housing reform and it was thumped down.
Yeah.
They lost the mandate. And it was because, as we were saying before, you can blame all of these housing conglomerates that are run in Singapore and Brazil and stuff, and they have like a bigger share of the market, but as we said, there are a bunch of boomers and stuff that also own these houses as well, and they don't want it. They don't want to change that.
No, because they've got a lot of stuff invested in that, and like we talked about before, they've been sold a dream. This is their nest egg, and this is what's going to get them.
And but it delivered as well. That's the other thing.
Yeah, but like if you provided them with an adequate means of living after retirement, like you supported them, you say, don't worry, no matter what happens, when you turn 65, we're going to give you this and we're going to give you that. We're going to look after all the old people. You would have people less resistant to giving up their retirement plan.
I don't know about that, man. Come on. Like, do you think someone is going to give up 7 houses? Be like, no, I'm getting an adequate pension. That's fine.
Don't know.
Well, they tried. They already tried it with these reforms to housing and negative gearing. And even that was too much.
But like the system isn't there to support these people giving things up. They don't have the security.
Oh, like a buyback like Howard with the guns or
but
something.
Like just giving them adequate social infrastructure that when they retire, they're going to be looked after appropriately. Most people's like idea that when they retire, they're fucking on their own and the pension's not going to cover it for them. So unless they do have a fucking backup plan like 7 houses or something like that to sustain their current lifestyle.
Well, that was the genius of superannuation, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's kind of... It's not delivered in the way that they had hoped for, because like it should have changed incrementally over time. There should have been a lot of reform and change to superannuation types of schemes and retirement schemes to keep it up to date with like what we were talking about before, inflation and stuff like that. There should have been progressive changes to it, developments and improvements to that system to make it relevant.
Yes.
Because if someone who's on 150K a year, like a middle class / professional, and like, unless they're going to get 150K in their pension, which they're not going to fucking get, they need to have fucking 7 houses or whatever the fuck they think is going to give them their lifestyle and their ability to keep living the way that they want to live. And so if you don't have that social infrastructure, don't ask them to give up their fucking houses.
But that's what they were trying to build, right? And like, it's the same thing. It's just like the Labor Party was trying to build that superannuation that gave you that very safe nest egg when you
Yes.
don't, and it was just absolutely gutted by the Liberals when they came in, and so you don't have that. However, you still do have, for the first time in history, which is like everyone always saying, "Oh, you're so neoliberal," and all this kind of stuff. It's like that guy gave the working class, all of them, a say in the investment in the investment sphere of the economy. That's a huge change. Yes, it wasn't delivered correctly, but it's still like if you're talking about a social progress where people own these kinds of things, nothing has been bigger than that. Yeah. And it's like the question is though that that's these things happen, but man, every time there's ever this argument, the guy that is supporting capitalism will always say, "You're not factoring in human greed." And at that point, I'm just like, he's won. He's won. It's just like, there's no way. Like, I'm not giving up my 7 houses. Fuck you. Like, of course you're going to think that.
Look, there's a whole... Marx also had a take on that commodity fetishization. It's like... the idea is like lack of class consciousness of like how this is fitting into the bigger schemes. You're alienated, so you start finding value in commodities that don't necessarily have as much value as you think they do.
Yes.
Which was like the whole idea of use value. Like every commodity has a certain amount of use value, and then it has exchange value. So maybe the exchange value might be different from use value. Like
yes.
Anyways, that's a whole topic altogether. We're running out of time, Mister. Do you guys, Jordan, you want to wrap up with some questions?
Yeah. We'll continue this on the up late. So if you want to hear the rest of it, you have to sign up to that.
Yep. Thanks for joining us.
Straight after Bucks.
Low price.
Talk about fetishizing commodities, huh?
Thanks for joining us for this week. Make sure you follow Mystere. He's got a YouTube channel, and he
check him out. He's good.
If you want to hear more, if you're interested, if you're intrigued, make sure you check that out.